In a small, quiet town, nestled between rolling hills and dusty roads, lived a woman named Clara. She was in her late 20s, with gentle eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken sorrows and a quiet smile that rarely reached its full brightness. Despite her warmth and kindness, Clara had always felt like an invisible shadow in the lives of those around her. From childhood, she had struggled to feel seen or appreciated. While other children were showered with affection and attention, Clara often found herself overlooked, her efforts unnoticed, her achievements dismissed. At school, Clara was the diligent student who always completed her work perfectly, yet teachers rarely called on her. Friends came and went, drawn to her good nature, but eventually drifted away, leaving her with an echoing sense of being unwanted. Even in her family, the dynamics were difficult. Her parents, though not unkind, were distant and preoccupied with their own lives. They never quite understood her, never seemed to recognize her quiet brilliance or the depth of her compassion. Every birthday passed with obligatory gifts and hollow celebrations, reinforcing the quiet message she had internalized. She was not important. Now, in her adulthood, Clara's sense of invisibility had only intensified. She worked at a small bookstore in the town square, a cozy place with the scent of old paper and coffee lingering in the air. Her life was predictable, a steady rhythm of opening and closing the store, assisting customers, and returning home to an empty apartment. On most days, she watched couples holding hands and families laughing together as they strolled past the store's windows. Each smile and embrace stirred a deep ache in her chest, a yearning for connection she feared might never come. Clara had tried to change her circumstances. She joined local clubs, attended social gatherings, even ventured into online dating. Yet each attempt seemed to highlight the gap between her desire to be loved and the reality she faced. Messages went unanswered, invitations declined, and romantic gestures faded into silence. Over time, the constant rejection eroded her confidence, leaving behind a quiet, gnawing doubt about her worth. "What's wrong with me?" she often whispered to herself late at night, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, the hum of the street outside providing a melancholic soundtrack. Despite these hardships, Clara had not lost her capacity for empathy. She helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, volunteered at the town's animal shelter, and stayed up late comforting friends through their troubles. Her life, though lonely, was filled with small acts of love and generosity, yet she often wondered if anyone truly saw or valued her for who she was. Her heart longed for more than fleeting recognition. She craved a bond, a sense of belonging, and a family of her own. It was this combination of quiet resilience and aching longing that defined Clara's world. She carried the heavy truth that, in her eyes, no one wanted her, not romantically, not socially, not in the deeper sense of human connection. And yet, beneath her sorrow, there flickered a tiny ember of hope. Somewhere, somehow, she believed that her story was not yet finished, that her life could still change in ways she could not yet imagine. This fragile hope, buried beneath layers of disappointment and heartache, was the seed that would, in time, set her on a path toward the extraordinary change her heart had been waiting for. Clara's life unfolded against the backdrop of a town that seemed frozen in time. Nestled among gentle hills and winding roads, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's name, or at least thought they did. Painted storefronts lined the main street, their colors faded by years of sun and wind. The air carried. The faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery mingled with the earthy scent of nearby farmland. To outsiders, the town seemed idyllic, serene, and comforting. But for Clara, it often felt confining, like a small pond where life circulated in familiar, unchanging patterns, patterns that seemed to leave her on the periphery. The townspeople were friendly in a superficial sense, always greeting with a nod or a smile, yet few reached beyond pleasantries to form deeper connections. Families were tightly knit, children ran in groups, and couples walked hand in hand along the cobblestone streets. Clara would watch them from the bookstore window, her fingers tracing the spines of novels, longing for a warmth that always seemed just out of reach. Every laugh, every shared glance, every whispered word of affection reminded her of what she had never fully experienced, a sense of belonging. Even the small joys of the town seemed to highlight her isolation. On Saturday mornings, the local market buzzed with activity. Farmers displayed baskets overflowing with fresh produce, and artisans sold handmade crafts. Clara wandered through the stalls, greeting vendors politely, buying fresh bread or a jar of honey, yet always alone. She noticed mothers guiding children through the crowd, their eyes meeting with shared understanding, their laughter carrying like a song she could never join. Clara's heart would tighten with a mixture of admiration and envy. She longed for a bond like that, a connection so effortless it seemed natural. Despite the town's outward charm, Clara often felt invisible within it. Conversations at the cafe were dominated by neighbors who spoke in familiar codes of shared history, a past Clara was never part of. Invitations to gatherings were rarely extended to her, and when they were, they often felt obligatory rather than genuine. She was the person people waved to, smiled at, or helped with minor errands, but no one reached out to truly know her. It was a subtle kind of loneliness, one that didn't scream, but quietly gnawed at her spirit. Yet Clara's days were not without small beauties. She loved the town's old library, where sunlight spilled across dust motes and the scent of aging. Paper filled the air. She adored the quiet paths along the riverbank, where the water whispered and the trees seemed to listen. On these walks, she felt a sense of calm, a connection to the world around her, even if human connection remained elusive. Birds perched. On branches, the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and for brief moments the world felt expansive rather than confining. It was in this small town, with its gentle rhythms and hidden longings, that Clara's story began to shift. Her life had settled into a predictable routine. Yet beneath the surface, the currents of hope and longing flowed quietly. She craved something extraordinary, something that could break the pattern of being unseen and unwanted. Little did she know the change she yearned for would come not through grand gestures or distant dreams, but through a moment so simple and pure that it would forever alter the course of her life. Clara had reached a crossroads in her life. Each day felt like a repetition of the last. Wake up, work, return home, and lie awake in the quiet darkness of her apartment, listening to the faint hum of the street below. She had tried to forge connections through friends, online dating, and social events, but each attempt had ended in quiet disappointment. It wasn't that she lacked kindness or charm. It seemed the world simply overlooked her. The realization had begun to weigh heavily on her, a silent ache that refused to fade. One evening, while scrolling aimlessly on her laptop, Clara stumbled upon an advertisement she hadn't noticed before, a mail-order bride service. At first, she laughed softly at the idea, feeling both amused and skeptical. The concept felt almost foreign, yet part of her couldn't deny the flicker of hope it ignited. Could it be possible, she wondered, that somewhere out there, someone might see her for who she truly was? Someone might truly want her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the next several days, Clara found herself returning to the website repeatedly. She read the profiles of men from distant places, their faces smiling back from the screen. Some appeared kind, others ambitious or charming, yet all seemed more interested in what they might gain than in genuine connection. Still, she persisted, drawn by the faint glimmer of possibility. If nothing else, she reasoned, it was an opportunity to step outside the predictable confines of her small town, to imagine a life where she could belong somewhere else. Making the decision was not easy. Clara questioned her motives, her fears, and the potential risks. What if she was rejected again? What if she placed her heart in the hands of someone unworthy? These doubts haunted her, keeping her awake late into the night. Yet beneath the fear, there was a stubborn spark of courage, a desire to take control of her story rather than wait for fate to notice her. She realized that waiting had brought her nothing but quiet suffering. Action, however uncertain, might bring her something more. Finally, with trembling hands, Clara composed her first message. She wrote honestly, letting her words reflect the sincerity of her heart. She didn't embellish or pretend to be someone she was not. She described her love of books, her quiet nature, her longing for connection, and the small acts of care she offered to those around her. Hitting send felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying yet liberating. For the first time in a long while, Clara had done something for herself, something that felt entirely brave. Over the following days, she waited with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Each ping of her email made her heart leap, yet often it was met with silence or polite rejection. She felt the familiar sting of being overlooked, yet she also noticed something different this time. She had acted with courage. Whether it led to love or disappointment, she had taken a step toward claiming her own happiness. The decision to explore this unconventional path had awakened a new sense of hope, a fragile, tentative hope that perhaps the world had more to offer her than the invisible life she had lived so far. As Clara sat by the window one evening, gazing at the lights flickering across the town, she felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while she sensed a possibility of change, somewhere beyond the horizon, or perhaps much closer than she imagined. Her life might shift in a way that would make her feel seen, cherished, and truly wanted. And in that quiet, hopeful moment, Clara understood that her story was only just beginning. After sending her first few messages through the mail-order bride service, Clara felt a cautious optimism. For the first time in years, she dared to imagine someone, anyone, valuing her for who she was. She pictured long conversations, shared laughter, and the possibility of finally being wanted, truly wanted. Yet reality, as it often had, soon reminded her of its harshness. The first response she received was polite, but lukewarm. The man thanked her for writing and complimented her sincerity, yet made it clear he was not interested. Clara's chest tightened, but she reminded herself that this was only the beginning. Maybe the next one would be different. But each message that followed carried the same disappointment. Some men never replied at all, leaving her staring at the empty inbox, with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Others replied briefly, offering excuses or gentle refusals. With each rejection, a quiet ache grew within her, a familiar companion she had carried for years. It was not just the rejections themselves that hurt. It was the sense of invisibility that accompanied them. Clara had poured honesty and hope into her words, sharing pieces of her heart that she rarely let anyone see. And yet, time and again, it seemed that no one truly noticed. Even the men who responded were often focused on superficial qualities or distant ambitions, never stopping to acknowledge the depth of her kindness, the warmth of her nature, or the quiet resilience that had carried her through a lifetime of being overlooked. By the end of the week, Clara began to feel the weight of despair settling over her. The small spark of hope she had felt when sending her messages flickered under the repeated rejections. She questioned herself relentlessly. Is there something wrong with me? Am I destined to be alone forever? Her confidence, already fragile, from years of loneliness, felt increasingly brittle, as if each refusal was another invisible hand pushing her further into the shadows. Despite the pain, Clara refused to give up entirely. Each morning, she would sit at her small kitchen table, cup of tea in hand, and stare at her laptop. She told herself that perseverance was its own kind of bravery, that continuing to try, even in the face of repeated disappointment, was proof of her courage. Yet the emotional toll was undeniable. She began to withdraw from the few social connections she had, spending more time in the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by books that provided companionship in place of human connection. It was during one particularly lonely evening that Clara realized how deeply she longed to be seen. She scrolled through the inbox one last time, pausing at each unanswered message. Her eyes filled with tears as she imagined the life she had hoped for slipping further out of reach. The rejection felt like more than just no. It felt like an echo of a lifetime spent feeling invisible, unwanted, and alone. Yet even in this low moment, Clara's story was far from over. While the world seemed determined to overlook her, the universe had a quiet way of preparing her for something unexpected. A shift was coming, something small but powerful enough to pierce the armor of loneliness she had built around her heart. And though she could not see it yet, the encounter that would change everything was only days away. A moment that would prove that even when everyone else says no, love and belonging can arrive in the most unexpected form. The weekend arrived, bringing with it the usual buzz of activity in the small town. Clara had initially planned to stay home, cocooned in the safety of her apartment, nursing the ache left by yet another series of rejections. But something in her stirred. A faint, almost imperceptible urge to step outside, to feel the world moving around her rather than remaining trapped in silence. She dressed carefully, pulling on a light coat and scarf, and made her way to the town square, where a community festival had been announced. The square was alive with movement and color. Stalls lined the cobblestone streets, each decorated with vibrant banners, balloons, and handmade signs. The smell of roasted corn and sweet pastries filled the air, mingling with the earthy scent of freshly cut grass. Musicians played cheerful tunes from a small stage, and children darted between the crowds, their laughter ringing like bells. Clara felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. The energy around her was both inviting and intimidating, a reminder of the life she had long observed from the edges. Clara wandered slowly among the stalls, her fingers brushing the surfaces of handcrafted trinkets and jars of homemade preserves. She smiled politely at the vendors, nodding in greeting, yet she felt the familiar pang of solitude. Families moved together in tight clusters, couples whispered to one another, and friends shared jokes and stories. She felt like a ghost drifting among the living, present, but unseen. Still, she reminded herself that she was there to experience something different, to push against the weight of her loneliness, even if just for a few hours. She stopped at a stall displaying small wooden toys, admiring the intricate carvings and careful craftsmanship. A little boy ran past, nearly knocking over a display of painted figurines, and Clara instinctively steadied the table with a gentle hand. The child's mother gave her a grateful nod, and for a fleeting moment, Clara felt the warmth of human acknowledgement. It was brief, but it reminded her that kindness could still ripple outward, even when life felt bleak. As she continued through the crowd, Clara noticed a small girl sitting quietly on the edge of a fountain, her legs swinging back and forth. Unlike the other children who were shouting and running freely, this girl seemed hesitant, almost shy, yet there was a light in her eyes that drew Clara's attention. Something about her presence stirred an unfamiliar flutter in Clara's chest, a mixture of curiosity, tenderness, and protective instinct. The girl looked up and caught Clara's gaze, holding it with a trust that felt both fragile and profound. Clara found herself moving closer, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. The festival noises seemed to fade around them, and for a moment, it was as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. The girl's small hand hovered near a basket of flowers, and Clara offered a gentle smile, a silent invitation for connection. It was the first time in a long while that Clara felt seen, not for what she had tried to project or what she had failed to attain, but simply for the quiet presence she carried. This encounter, seemingly ordinary in the bustling festival, would mark the beginning of an extraordinary change. It was a subtle moment, almost accidental, yet it carried within it the seeds of hope, belonging, and love that Clara had long yearned for. In the midst of rejection, isolation, and despair, a small spark had appeared, one that promised that even in the loneliest of places, connection could find its way. Clara stood near the fountain, her eyes locked on the little girl who seemed so quietly out of place among the festival's lively chaos. There was something unusual about the child's presence. Her gaze was steady, almost knowing, as if she could see Clara in a way no one else did. Clara's heart, long accustomed to being ignored, skipped in a way that startled her. The girl hesitated for a moment, clutching a small stuffed animal to her chest. Her eyes flitted toward her mother, who was chatting with neighbors across the square, then back to Clara. Slowly, with tentative steps, she approached Clara. Each movement was careful and deliberate, like she was testing the waters of trust. Clara bent slightly, lowering herself to meet the child's level, her face soft and inviting. "Hi," Clara said gently, her voice a mixture of warmth and nervousness. "What's your name?" The girl paused, glancing down at her feet, then whispered, "Lila." Clara's chest tightened at the simplicity of the moment, the way a name so small could carry such weight. She smiled softly. "Hello, Lila. Are you having fun at the festival?" Lila nodded shyly but didn't answer in words. Instead, she looked up at Clara with wide, trusting eyes, her small hand inching toward Clara's. It was a silent gesture, yet loaded with meaning, as if she instinctively knew that Clara could be someone safe, someone who might care. Clara reached out slowly, allowing Lila's hand to brush against hers. The contact was gentle, almost electric, and in that instant, Clara felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. They walked together along the edge of the fountain, Lila holding tightly to Clara's hand. She pointed out flowers, small toys, and people passing by, speaking only in soft, simple observations. Clara listened intently, letting herself be fully present in the child's world. The chatter of the festival faded into background noise. In that moment, there was only the two of them, an unlikely pair discovering a quiet connection. Clara's heart swelled with a strange combination of surprise and tenderness. She had spent years feeling unwanted, overlooked, and invisible, and yet here was a child who had chosen her, who had reached across the gap of her solitude without hesitation or judgment. The realization was both startling and comforting. Someone had noticed her, truly noticed her, and it mattered. As they paused, by a small wooden stall, Lila looked up at Clara with an intensity that made her heart catch. There was no pretense, no questioning, only a simple, profound trust. Clara found herself leaning slightly closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to show you something?" Lila's eyes widened, and she nodded eagerly. In that simple gesture, Clara felt a fragile but undeniable spark of purpose and belonging ignite within her. The moment was fleeting, yet it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. It was in this first encounter, quiet, unassuming, and pure, that Clara sensed the possibility of a bond that could change everything. Little did she know that Lila's next words, spoken softly and without hesitation, would forever alter the course of her life, breaking through years of loneliness and rejection in a single innocent whisper. Clara and Lila had wandered together along the festival, their hands lightly brushing, their presence creating a quiet bubble of calm amid the bustling crowd. Clara had never felt a connection so immediate and profound, so effortless. She laughed, softly at Lila's small observations and gestures, and in return, Lila's shy smiles grew more confident, more trusting. It was as if they had known each other far longer than a single afternoon, as if their souls recognized one another across the invisible barriers of time and circumstance. They paused near a small fountain, the water shimmering in the sunlight. Lila tugged gently on Clara's hand, drawing her closer. Clara knelt down, lowering herself to the child's level, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar mix of anticipation and fear. She had never expected this moment, nor could she have imagined its intensity. Then softly, almost as if the words themselves were precious and fragile, Lila whispered, "Can you be my mommy?" Time seemed to stop. The sounds of the festival, the laughter, the music, the clatter of footsteps, faded into a distant hum. Clara stared at the child, her eyes wide, her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and overwhelming emotion. She felt a surge of warmth, a mixture of shock, joy, and an almost unbearable tenderness. The words were so small, so simple, yet they carried the weight of something immense, a plea for love, trust, and belonging. Clara's hands trembled, slightly as she reached out to brush a strand of hair from Lila's face. "Lila," she whispered, her voice breaking. She struggled for words, unsure if she was allowed to feel the intensity of what she was feeling. For years, she had longed for someone to want her, someone to see her for who she truly was, and now, in a single moment, a little girl had done just that. The tears she had held back for so long began to form, blurring her vision. Yet they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition and hope. Someone wanted her. Someone trusted her. Someone had chosen her not for what she could offer or for appearances, but simply because she was who she was. The simplicity of Lila's words cut through years of loneliness, dissolving the doubts and fears that had plagued Clara's heart. Clara took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steadying. I can be your mommy." Lila's face lit up with a radiant smile, one that seemed to hold all the joy of a lifetime. She reached up and hugged Clara tightly, wrapping her small arms around Clara's neck. In that embrace, Clara felt a completeness she had never known, the profound truth that she was wanted, needed, and capable of giving and receiving love, in a way she had never imagined. The whisper had changed everything. It had shattered the loneliness that had defined her life and replaced it with something far more powerful: connection, hope, and the promise of a new beginning. In that single innocent question, Clara found not only a purpose, but also a family she had longed for in ways words could not capture. For the first time in her life, she understood that love often arrived when least expected, and sometimes it came not from those she had sought, but from the smallest, most unexpected places. And as she held Lila close, feeling the steady heartbeat of trust against her own, Clara knew that her life and her heart would never be the same again. After Lila's whispered question, Clara walked home slowly, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The festival's colors, sounds, and laughter faded behind her as she replayed the little girl's words over and over. "Can you be my mommy?" Each repetition sent a ripple through her heart, a mix of warmth, fear, and disbelief. For years, Clara had longed to be wanted, to be seen, and now, in an instant, that longing had been answered. Yet the joy was tangled with uncertainty. Could she really be the person Lila needed? Could she fill a role that seemed both monumental and unfamiliar? That night, Clara sat by the window of her small apartment, staring out at the quiet streets. The city lights shimmered faintly, reflecting on her tear-streaked cheeks. She felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on her chest, not sorrow, but the enormity of the responsibility she was being offered. Lila's innocent trust had stirred something deep within her, yet doubt gnawed persistently at the edges of her heart. Am I ready for this? Can I be enough for her? Memories of her own childhood flooded back, reminding her of the emptiness she had carried for so long. She had always wished for someone to guide her, to care for her in ways that went beyond duty or obligation. She had felt the sting of invisibility, the quiet ache of being overlooked. And now the universe had placed that same trust in her hands. Clara realized that love, though extraordinary, also came with fear. She feared failing, feared that the bond she yearned for might crumble under her own insecurities. For hours, she reflected on her life, the loneliness, the repeated rejections, the quiet acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed. She realized that despite everything, she had never given up entirely. She had maintained a fragile hope that love and belonging were still possible. And here it was, a chance to experience connection not as a distant dream, but as a tangible reality. Yet the stakes felt higher than ever before, because this time someone's heart, someone so small and trusting, was in her care. As the night deepened, Clara began to understand that hesitation was natural. Fear did not diminish the beauty of the moment. It only emphasized its significance. She whispered to herself, "It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have all the answers. What matters is that I try." And in that quiet acknowledgement, she felt a small, steady courage ignite within her. By morning, Clara had made a decision, not a final answer, but a willingness to step forward. She knew that love and trust could not be measured or controlled. They were cultivated slowly, with patience, empathy, and presence. She resolved to let herself open to the possibility of becoming more than she had ever imagined. Lila's question had given her a gift, a reminder that she was capable of being wanted, needed, and loved, and that sometimes the simplest acts of courage, saying yes to connection, could change a life forever. With the sunrise casting a soft glow over her apartment, Clara felt a cautious optimism she hadn't felt in years. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but it was also filled with promise. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she belonged, where her heart was full, and where love, unexpected, profound, and transformative, was finally within reach. The following days were a mixture of cautious steps and quiet discoveries. Clara knew that Lila's trust was a fragile treasure, one that could not be rushed or forced. Each morning, she would wake with a renewed sense of purpose, thinking of the little girl who had changed everything with a single question. She began visiting Lila, bringing small treats, storybooks, and games, simple gestures that gradually wove the threads of connection between them. At first, their interactions were tentative. Lila would observe Clara with curiosity, occasionally, retreating when overwhelmed by the intensity of her own feelings. Clara, in turn, was careful not to overstep, letting Lila set the pace of their growing bond. She spoke gently, listened intently, and celebrated each small milestone, a laugh shared, a hand held, a secret whispered. With each passing day, Clara felt the warmth of belonging seep into her own heart, filling spaces that had been empty for far too long. They discovered routines that became their own little rituals. Morning walks to the park, afternoons spent reading in the sunlight, evenings baking cookies together, each moment layered with affection and trust. Clara found herself laughing more freely, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And Lila, in turn, blossomed in the security of Clara's presence. The little girl's shyness began to fade, replaced by confidence and joy that radiated in every smile and playful glance. Clara also found herself reflecting on the transformative power of small acts of love. A gentle touch, a comforting word, a shared story. These simple gestures became the foundation of a relationship built on trust, understanding, and mutual care. The bond between them was not instant perfection, but a slow, deliberate weaving, of hearts that neither had realized they needed so desperately, neighbors and friends, began to notice the change in Clara. The once reserved woman who had drifted quietly through life now carried herself with a gentle confidence, her face often lit by the warmth of genuine connection. Lila, too, was radiant, her laughter ringing through the streets as she held Clara's hand or whispered little secrets in her ear. Together they became a small, undeniable force of joy in the town, a living testament to the quiet, transformative power of love and acceptance. Through this time, Clara understood something profound. Love was not only about being needed, but also about giving freely, without expectation. The bond she shared with Lila was mutual, an unspoken understanding that each had found in the other something essential, a sense of home, a place of safety, and a heart willing to embrace them fully. As weeks turned into months, the connection deepened. Clara and Lila laughed at shared jokes, comforted each other in moments of sadness, and celebrated even the smallest victories together. The house Clara had once returned to in solitude now echoed with laughter, warmth, and the presence of someone who had chosen her just as decisively as she had chosen to step forward. For Clara, the journey from loneliness to love had been sudden yet gentle, a reminder that even the most unexpected encounters could transform a life completely. She had been rejected, overlooked, and unseen for so long, but in Lila's trust and affection, she discovered not only that she was wanted, but that she could create a world of belonging and joy that had once seemed impossible. And so, their bond solidified, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but through everyday moments of love, patience, and unwavering presence, a quiet, powerful proof that sometimes the simplest forms of connection are the most transformative of all. The seasons shifted gently in the small town, painting the streets with colors of change. Clara's life, once a quiet rhythm of solitude and longing, now pulsed with the warmth and laughter of a new family she had never imagined. The apartment that had once echoed with silence was now alive with the small sounds of Lila's footsteps, the soft rustle of bedtime stories, and the giggles of shared discoveries. Every corner seemed infused with memory and possibility, a testament to the bond that had transformed both their lives. Clara often paused to watch Lila play, marveling at the little girl's energy and curiosity. She remembered the day at the festival, the whispered question that had shattered her loneliness and opened the door to love. That simple moment, so small yet so profound, had become the cornerstone of everything beautiful in her life. Clara realized that hope, even in its most fragile form, could be a powerful force, capable of reshaping destiny in ways one could never predict. The relationship between them deepened with each passing day. Clara learned to navigate the joys and challenges of motherhood, the tender care, the gentle guidance, and the patience required to nurture a child's heart. Lila, in turn, blossomed under Clara's consistent love and attention. Her shyness faded into confidence, her smiles grew brighter, and her laughter became a daily reminder that even the smallest acts of trust could bring immeasurable joy. Together, they formed a rhythm, a balance of giving and receiving, of learning and teaching, of comforting and celebrating. Their bond extended beyond the walls of the apartment. Neighbors and friends noticed the transformation in Clara. Her once quiet demeanor had softened into a presence that radiated warmth and joy. She walked through the town square with Lila by her side, hand in hand, a visible symbol of resilience and love. People who had once overlooked her began to see her differently, not just for her kindness, but for the courage and devotion she had shown in building a family from love and trust rather than obligation. Clara herself felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The years of rejection, loneliness, and self-doubt had not been erased, but they had been reframed as a prelude to this new chapter. She understood now that being wanted was not always about external validation, but about finding and nurturing the connections that mattered most. Lila had shown her that love could arrive unexpectedly, often from the smallest gestures and simplest moments, and that it had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. On quiet evenings, they would sit together by the window, watching the sun set over the town. Lila would curl up next to Clara, resting her head on her shoulder, and Clara would feel the steady warmth of trust and love. In those moments, Clara understood that she was exactly where she belonged. The ache of feeling invisible had been replaced by a life overflowing with purpose, joy, and connection. In the end, Clara's story was no longer defined by rejection or loneliness. It was defined by resilience, courage, and the transformative power of love. Through a single whispered question, she had discovered a new beginning, not just for herself, but for Lila, and for the family they had chosen together. Clara had finally learned the most profound truth. Sometimes, when the world says no, life answers with something far more extraordinary. And in that answer, she had found everything she had ever longed for: a place to belong, a heart to cherish, and a life forever changed by the simple, enduring power of love.